Hello, my name is Andrea Sinclair, and I want to include some information that I did not speak of in my first video regarding cranial bones and the 14 facial bones. I would like to mention, I'm going to lift up my model. I'd like to mention regarding the external occipital protuberance. I want to make mention that this provides attachment. The external occipital, as I mentioned earlier, is in the back. Well, that protuberance is like a ridge on the skull, and it provides attachment for certain muscles, occipital meaning around the eyes. I'd like to mention a few features of the temporal bones. You have on the external view, the temporal bones, external views, temporal mandibular joint that connects the mandible with the rest of the skull. You have the mastoid process, styloid process, external acoustic meatus, and the squamous part. I'd like to mention that the petrous part of temporal bone, the structures that are housed within the part of this temporal bone, the structures are the ear cavities that it houses. And also what passes through the internal acoustic meatus are the cranial nerves, 7 and 8. Now to mention the sphenoid external view, lateral and orbital parts, greater wing, lesser wing. For the superior orbital fissure, I'd like to mention that what passes through this opening is a long slit between the greater and lesser wings. What passes through is the cranial nerves. The internal view, lesser wing, greater wing, is the project lateral. You have the optic nerves that pass through the optic canal with the sella turcica. The structure that sits in the fossa is the pituitary gland. Now I'd like to mention the ethmoid bone. There is a feature that I failed to mention in my first video, the crista galli. What it basically does is secures the brain in the cranial cavity. The cribriform plate, what passes through there is the olfactory nerves. The olfactory nerves are responsible for our sense of smell. I'd like to take the time to mention sutures, which I don't have a view really good for this model. But the sutures, I'd like to mention we have 4 sutures. Coronal, the parietal bones meet. Let me see if I can point that out. The parietal bones meet there. The sagittal, which is the midline, meets at the cranial. The labdoid, parietal bones meet at the occipital bone, so the labdoid suture would be in the back. And the squamous, it's the parietal and temporal where both of those bones meet. I'd like to mention, as far as the facial bones, the zygomatic, 2 bones form the prominence of the cheeks. The vomer, what 2 bones form the bony nasal septum, would include the inferior nasal concha, and that lies in the lateral walls of the cavity. The mandible, we have features the body, the angle ramus, the mandibular condyle, which is I want to mention that's an articular point, the mandibular notch, the coronoid process, which are insertion points for the temporalis muscles. And let's see if I can lift up my model to display the vertebrae. We have 4 curves of the adult vertebrae section, beginning with the cervical in the neck, point toward the neck, thoracic, which would be somewhere in there, the lumbar, which is the back, and the sacral, which is more toward the hip. The cervical vertebrae has 7, beginning at the very base of the skull. And the atlas, what does this bone articulate with the superior, would be the occipital condyles. All right, thank you. This will conclude this presentation, which is really part of the first presentation. Thank you.